Alright guys, so we're going to go ahead and jump in and play in Blender a little bit. I've opened up the old man file. This is a newer video that I'm creating just to help you out a little bit because there's been a pretty big update to Blender and some of their tools and things have moved around. So whenever it first pulls up, you'll notice that you might be looking in a different viewpoint. They will have multiple vantage points here. And you might also find that your old man head is in like a wire form. If that's the case, don't stress, we can totally bring it back. So my biggest advice for you guys is to simply open up the program and just start playing around a little bit. Notice that there's little windows that you can change out up here at the top, and your toolbar is over on the left. If your toolbar is collapsed, you'll see a tiny little arrow that you can click that will pull out your toolbar. So you can scroll around a mouse pad or just using your mouse. And then if you look down here, there's a solid circle that will put your texture back on top if your old man happens to be in a wire frame. Alright, so now that we're kind of taking a look at him, you'll notice that he's got these weird round red circles kind of all around him. These are pinpoints, these are markers that we can use to pinch and move. So I can have my move tool and move things on an X, Y, Z axes. I can rotate on that same axis, or if I wanted to, I'm also able to adjust not just the rotation, not just the vertical movements and the horizontal movements, but I can also scale my character as well. But what you're going to do is you're going to grab each individual ring, each individual red floating halo, and move those individually. So there's my scale as well. Probably won't be using that a whole lot, but if you want a little squash and stretch inside your character, by all means go on ahead. That can give you a little kind of a rubbery feel. It can look kind of nice. As you're using these move tools, as you're using these rotate tools, you'll find that they're a little bit sticky. They don't quite do exactly what you want them to do. I highly suggest that you just play around. But something else you can do if you want a little more free form is you can grab something, say like the jaw, and just press the G key. I can grab it, and now I can move it in 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. I can also press the R key, and that will allow me to free rotate as well. I find quite often whenever I'm animating in 3D that just simply using the G and the R key makes for a more fluid process rather than a kind of static robotic process. You can move almost everything on this guy's face here. You just grab a little angle there and play around. So what I'd suggest is that you do just that. Have fun playing. Right, so now let's get into the basics of animation. So you've got your character, he's already rigged, that's what all those little loopy red circles are. So I can select kind of all of them and I can actually move everything I need to around. Pop out our little menu over here. So down here in the bottom, we're actually going to change this from the preferences, that's what we're in kind of right now. We're going to change this and move over to our timeline. So the timeline is going to allow us to see time, but also to record and then adjust what we're doing. So the big thing is this: whenever you are using Blender or any kind of animation software, you want to be working within what are called keyframes. So you are not moving every single tiny millimeter at a time. Instead, you're going from point A, a gap of time, to point B. So, for example, let's say that I wanted him to slowly turn his head, right? So I'd be using the ring around his cranium and the ring around his neck to slowly turn his neck. Now, if I want that to be the case, I have to think about how much time do I want that turn to happen. So, for example, I'm going to come over here to his forehead. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything, come over to this little tiny red dot here, and press that. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and insert some keyframes. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead, I want to turn his head. So I need to start it somewhere. So I'm going to use my hotkeys here, my R and my G, to rotate and to grab. So I'm going to rotate and tilt his head a little bit like that, give him a little more characteristics than just simply rotating. And notice whenever I moved him, I get these little lines down here. This is showing me, these little yellow diamonds are showing me the keyframes that I've just created. Okay. Now let's add a little bit more dynamic range here. I'm going to click over. I've grabbed a new ring, a new anchor there, and notice that those yellow diamonds went away. They're still on this one. They're not on any others. Each one of these has their own set of keyframes. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this as well. Let's go ahead and grab that and just, whoa, kind of shift him to the side. And I'm going to grab with G, I'm going to pull him out. I want a little bit of springiness whenever he turns his head. Maybe it's kind of whipping around. That'd be kind of fun. Okay, so I've got that going on, looking pretty good. And I'll grab this base. I'm going to rotate that as well. And again, I'm automatically setting keyframes because I clicked this little tiny circle. So it is automatically, anytime I move anything with my hotkey R or hotkey G, my rotate or my grab, or any of these options on the side, anytime I alter that, it is going to automatically set a keyframe. All right, so I'm going to come on down here. I'm going to say, I don't know, maybe 1 second later. So that's about 24 frames per second. Okay, 24 frames per second. You can see right here is my frames per second, and I can change this. So I can make things move a little slower or a little faster. So this is showing what current frame I have, and I can minutely shift that along, but I'm going to stick with 24 for right now. All right, so on frame 24, 1 second later, I want him to be in a new pose. So let's go ahead and make that pose. So again, I'm going to start with this base. I'm going to kind of rotate that, just like so. That looks pretty good. Grab his neck. Maybe I want it to elongate, give him a little spring. Whoa, that's kind of bent back there. Let's rotate that around. Ooh, looks like a gummy neck right there. That's crazy. Grab the little ring around his forehead. We're going to tilt that as well, just like so. Now, if I want to really have more control, then instead of using the hotkeys, I can grab these tools over here. And grabbing onto the green, the red, and the blue are going to give me more specific directionality, more than just those quick little keys, those little hotkeys can. So I can move minute differences at a time, rotating that neck around, give him a little kind of gooseneck looking vibe. And what the computer is basically doing is it's memorizing that parameter. So for the blue rotation ring, it's at this many degrees. For the red rotation ring, it's at this many degrees. It's one giant math equation that you don't have to do because the computer is doing it for you. All right, so looks pretty good. And notice that as I scrub back, it automatically animates for me. It is interpolating between frame 0 and frame 24, right? I can keep this going. What happens if, as he raises and turns his head, I want him to keep doing that. Get more of an extreme angle on here. And at that very moment, I need him to open his mouth, right? Let's do something like that. I want him to open his mouth. Ah, okay, all right. So he's rotating his head, he's opening his mouth. Now again, as I switched to a different position, right, as I switch to a different position, I'm getting different keyframes. And remember that they are automatically adjusting. Okay, they're automatically saving because I have this button turned on. So again, I can pull it back, but notice his mouth doesn't close. Well, why is that? Well, simply because way back on frame 0, we never set his mouth to close in the first place. There was no keyframe beginning that motion. So I have to purposefully put it back where it was, or I can always just grab it and rotate it myself. Whoa. Let's try that again. There we go. So now that I've set his keyframe for his jaw, now that I've set it closed on frame 1, it will slowly open. But what happens if I really want him to just open his mouth between frame 24 and frame 40? I don't want it to be a slow open. I want it to be closed open. Okay, well, then I need to adjust my keyframe. So I'm going to come back to frame 24. I'm going to come back to his chin here, and I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to close it up. Just like that. And so that means that on frame 0 it's closed, all the way to frame 24 it's closed, and then between frame 24 and 40 it opens. See how I did that? What's cool about working in animation, especially digital animation, 3D animation, is that you are still modeling. You're still working as if this is a three-dimensional character, like stop motion, clay animation. But I can scrub back and forth in the timeline. So if I don't like the placement of his jaw, if I really say, I'm looking at it now and I'd rather it be over on this side, Or maybe by this point, I also want his eyes to look over here. I can just go back and change that, right? I can add in new keyframes wherever the heck I want them to be, and I can adjust them accordingly, right? So let's say that I want his eyes fixated on the ceiling until they're not, right? See that little shift right there? So you can play around. Now, what is going to happen at some point is you might get a pop, right? You might have where for one single frame, because you were just one notch off, you weren't on frame 32, you were on frame 31. For one frame, your eyes shift, right? And so now within one frame, they pop. See how that happens? Right? Nice and smooth, pop, right? If that is occurring, keep an eye out for it, right? You can simply just Command Z or undo, and you'll get rid of those keyframes, no problem. You can also always come down into your actual timeline and work on removing those keyframes as well. So I can always delete keyframes, and that will get rid of that problem as well. So keep an eye out as you're animating for little tiny pops. If you want to see it in progress, you can always hit play, and there's your movement. But remember that these numbers up here are not seconds, they are frames. So if you're thinking to yourself you want to go from from 0 to 1 in 1 second, that is just a single frame. That is a 24th of a second, right? So you got to think about timing a little bit, and don't be afraid to play it out just to get an idea of your speed. If you're not happy with it, you can always select frames. You can even move frames if you need to kind of crunch it a little bit and have a little bit more control over your animation. All right. Next up, let's talk about audio. All right, so now you're ready to do some lip syncing. So first you need to find some kind of quote from a movie, from a song. I like old B movies, so I'm going to use Plan 9 from Outer Space. And at the beginning of the movie, you have a fortune teller named Criswell. He's a real fortune teller, and he talks about
future events such as these will affect you in the future.
Yeah, so okay, there you go. So I'm going to chop up that line a little bit, but it's relatively short and sweet. There are ways to download off of YouTube that you can figure out. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and crack open Blender, do file, and open up our old man file here. And just like before, get yourself kind of situated into the animation viewpoint, pull up your timeline down at the bottom, get yourself kind of situated so that you're happy with it. Get rid of the wireframe there, just so that you are ready to start animating. Okay. Alright, so I'm situated and ready. Here up at the top, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different tabs. What we want is one particularly dealing with editing the video. So go ahead on down and pop that one out. There you go. So now we're in the video editing aspect of Blender. What's neat is you could use this as a regular old video editor if you wanted to. Go ahead and do Add and Music. And I'm going to go ahead and add in my file, and there it is. Now, there's a problem. It's the entire audio file. Yours might be really long, and we want to edit it.
And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future.
Okay, so I want to kind of crop off the end. So I can click on this arrow and shrink it in. And that would work pretty good. Okay, all right, so that looks pretty well. Now, you may want to cut a portion of yours out. If that's the case, you're going to need the letter K. So find where you want to cut and type the K key. K in this case is literally cutting the audio. And then select and delete. But instead of hitting delete key, to delete, you hit X. Why it's X and not delete, I couldn't tell you. And then hit OK, and away it goes. I'm going to scrub this back to 0, and we're looking pretty good.
Future events such as these will affect you in the future.
All right. Okay, good. So I think we're good to move on to the next step here. I'm going to jump back into the animation window real quick and go from there. All right, so here we go. Back in the animation window, audio's playing A-OK. All right, so what's going to end up happening? I know that my audio is 123 frames, so I'm going to change the limitations of my timeline there in the far corner. And that way, the entire video length is the length of my audio as well. Okay, cool. We're cooking with gas. Now, what I want to do in order to do a lip sync is I need to be able to scrub. I want to go back and forth so that I can really find the vowels. When you're doing any kind of lip sync, you really want to go for the vowels. So I'm going to come over here, and right there on playback up at the top, you'll see audio scrubbing. Click that, and now, yep, yep, perfect, perfect. Sounds like a, yeah. Okay. Sound like a DJ scratching on a record or something equally awesome. So yeah. So now that you can do that, you can scrub back and forth, and you're able to really hear those vowel sounds because that's what you're trying to punch on. Don't try to make a mouth movement for every single letter. Really hit on the vowels and then come back later if there's a particular like t t or sound. But vowels are the big thing. Okay. The best advice I can give you is have a mirror nearby. When you're animating, look at yourself. Look at the mouth movements that you have, that you make, and you'll be surprised how quickly you're able to mimic those in the computer here with our little character. Something else to take away as well is that this guy has a lot of different articulation in his face, but let's see here. Trying to find the first sound. But something that you want to do or remember is that he's not perfect. Okay, to make a perfectly like an ooh sound where he pinches his lips together, his lips don't go all the way together. That's a flaw in the actual model. I didn't actually create this fella. He is just a piece of freeware that I kind of took online. So yeah, all right. So I'm going to set up some basic keyframes here. I just selected everything by dragging and dropping. I right-clicked and added a keyframe for every single object down in my little timeline here. And I'm just going to start plunking in some keyframes. I'm going to go a little bit faster. I'm just going to do the first word, but I want you guys to kind of see what we got going on here. Okay, so I'm going to fast forward this real quick, and let's take a peek what we can do. All right, so we're just going to narrate over top, even though this is in kind of fast forward mode. Play around, right? Do not be afraid to play around as you're going along, but keep an eye on those keyframes as you go. So you really want to be cautious of little pops here and there because you maybe aren't on the same keyframe that you thought you were. You can always move those keyframes. Don't go too fast. You'd be surprised how slowly humans talk. If you want to add a little bit of character to your character, get the lip sync down first. Leave his eyes alone. Leave everything else alone. Just the mouth movements, the open and close of the eyes or of the mouth. Once you got the mouth down, then rewind back, at frame 0, and go back and start playing with maybe just the tilt of the head all the way through. Then go back again, play with the direction of the eyes. Where are they looking at? Maybe he blinks once or twice or raises his eyebrows on a particular syllable. But what's nice about 3D is you can always go back and forth, right? You are not stuck, animating on straight through. You can rewind, you can hit those keyframes, you can adjust your timing. If you're not happy, if it moves too quickly, move those little golden diamonds down there, your little keyframes. Move them around. The computer will do all the in-betweening for you. So that's not going to be a challenge for you. Here with mine, you can see I'm just going through, I'm kind of playing with his tongue movement, the location of his teeth, that red line there that's near his nose, that's actually the roof of his mouth. So I can drop his teeth and get kind of a gritting of his mouth where he kind of makes an sound. So I'm just going to go back and forth. I can hear the audio. I'm scrubbing back and forth, trying to find that perfect hit on each syllable. And like I said, as it goes through, you can kind of hear it in fast forward mode there. But as it goes through, I'm just trying to hit on each vowel or any main key consonant. Something else that can kind of help is that audio, the speed of sound is not as fast as the speed of light, right? So like science class. What that means is if I hear, say, an ooh sound, like you're making the letter O, ooh, you will actually see the mouth movement before you hear it. So once you hear the ooh sound, maybe go 1 or 2 keyframes or 1 or 2 frames forward, and that's where you put the actual mouth movement. I know it sounds silly, but go back and watch like a Pixar movie or any 3D animation. The lip syncs, the animation is a little bit ahead of the sound. Um, Other things you can do, Pixar notoriously has their characters blink at different times. And again, I know that sounds silly, but instead of blinking both eyes equally at the exact same time, go back and watch Toy Story 1. You can see it, and you'll never unsee it. Their eyes blink individually. And believe it or not, that actually gives more of a sense of realism. We as humans are not perfect. We are not robots. When I'm animating a character, I will often use that letter G to grab an element and kind of move it freely, even though it's not perfect. I like that smooth movement a little bit more than if I only used that vertical XYZ axes. It feels a little robotic then, right? Go back and forth, play it a little bit once or twice. You're going to be surprised how quickly this starts to work. But again, like I said, my biggest suggestion, work on just the mouth, then go back and work on the head and the eyebrows and everything else, but do each element individually. Don't try to do it all at once. It's going to drive you crazy, and you're going to have a lot of pops if you do it that way, a lot of weird little tangents. 3D animation can be a little bit goofy, a little bit weird, but you are going to be able to knock this out no problem. It's not a long project. It feels challenging, but you can sit with your laptop, watch a movie in the background, and just kind of slowly hammer through. So I'm going to play with the neck a little bit here, play with the tilt of the head, just to give them a little bit, kind of squash and stretch, a little bit of kind of give. It makes them kind of come alive, right? And then I'm also thinking about kind of punching on different syllables. So, he's saying "welcome, friends." I want him to really kind of punch on that first word. So I'm going to have his head kind of come forward just a little bit, a little piece of a tilt. The more movement you put, the more live it's going to feel. And when he feels alive, that's what's going to really bring everything together. I think you're going to be surprised how much this really captivates you. Animation can be quite addicting. So I hope you guys have some fun. And let's check out what I was able to do just for that first word.
Future events. Future events such as the